The opening sequence of episode 37, exactly like the aftermath of the female Titan mission, gives us a flashback to Eren and his mom, and importantly, immediately establishes the theme of inversions in this episode. After the female Titan mission, the message of the flashback was, Eren, you need to get stronger and protect Mikasa for once. Whereas in this episode, while Mikasa is of course there to free him, he would ultimately be the one to turn the tide in this entire conflict. However, while I say it establishes a theme of inversions, it also uses that same exact theme to even further build up the soul-crushing death of Hannes. There, we don't get an inversion at all. It plays out exactly the same. Power or no power, nothing has changed. There are plenty more of these throughout the episode, so we'll get to those later on. Another thing I think this opening does very well is build suspense. Because as much as I say it sets up the big Eren reveal later in the episode, it also immediately portrays the brutality and horror of the memories that led us here in the first place through that smash cut to his mom's death. It might start as a memory of his loving mother and her care for them, but those strings immediately clue you in that this is not a pleasant memory. And that trend very much continues as we snap right back to the present day, where those strings just keep building and building and building as yet again we face Dina. As for the title of the episode, Scream, I think this one has a couple of very straightforward interpretations. First off, the obvious one, it's Eren's scream and him activating the coordinates. Much like Zeke's scream started all of this in Ragako, Eren will end it with an equally impressive scream that too is of course powered by him coming into contact with Dina's royal blood. Though the other, much more overanalyzing and abstract interpretation is literally just this episode itself. Screams of pain, screams of fear, screams of sadness, screams of rage. The main part of this episode is just an absolute bloodbath. So I think the single word scream summarizes that fairly well. Okay, let's be real, it's definitely just referring to Eren's scream. Moving into the episode itself, we open right where we left off with Reiner tossing titans one after another, and long story short, it is just an absolute bloodbath. Erwin is continuing his charge for Reiner, but soon gets blasted off of his horse. And it's here where we get an incredible juxtaposition of him just saying, I'm replaceable, go get Eren. Only for us to then smash cut to the soldier he was just talking to being literally eaten in front of his eyes. Which again brings us back to that supposed original ending I mentioned last time. This whole thing is just hopeless. So yeah, if a long time ago the original ending is everyone dying right here, I think these are the remnants of that. Of course, if you are an overanalysis enjoyer, you'd probably assume that if Eren already lost his arm, he is 100% safe. Since, you know, what would be the point in losing an arm if you are to die anyway? From a writing perspective, losing the arm is already a form of loss without having to kill the character. So from that perspective, there's just not much point in doubling up. That aside though, the fact that their very own commander who masterminded nearly everything we had seen thus far is just abruptly cut off definitely cements that bleakness moving forward. Though it also further builds up the sort of greater good and bigger picture perspective of Erwin. For him, the mission is the most important. For us as the viewers, we are still arguing about whether or not he should have been saved, but from his point of view, he is just one dude. Eren, on the other hand, is, well, one, a Titan shifter, but much more importantly, a symbol that they too have a Titan on their side. This is something we'd be seeing a ton more throughout Season 3, so we'll leave all of that for when we get there. Speaking of self-sacrificial battles, a very similar situation is happening on Eren's side. We first see Mikasa jumping on top of Eren and trying to tank the hit from Dina. But then Hannes jumps in, just straight up body blocking the hit for both of them. We've talked about this in episodes prior, but in many ways, this is Hannes' story. In Shiganshina, he was paralyzed with fear and ever since has felt indebted to Eren's little trio and felt an obligation to look after them. Here on the other hand, he is jumping headfirst into a Titan strike without the least bit of hesitation. If his fight or flight response in Shiganshina was flight, then here it is basically let me solo her. The one thing I absolutely love here is just how chaotic this entire scene is, with that same Diablo-like eerie chanting music kicking in as we cycle through the characters, all just fighting for their lives. It's just constant and unrelenting. There's not a single moment in between where they can let their guards down. It's the armor titan, potentially colossal, the jaw still flying around, hordes and hordes of pure titans, runaway horses, and a dozen other things just littering the battlefield. I think that's exactly why I like that Jean's line so much, because man, does it describe the situation to a T.
Is this hell? Not yet, but it will be.
We then jump on over to Ymir, who quickly runs through her options. She once again notes that life inside of the walls would soon become a nightmare, likely alluding to the impending attack from Marley and another reason to give herself up. Though what I find most heartbreaking is 1, the way all of this is framed, and 2, the specific wording she uses next. Firstly, note the almost unnaturally long lingering scene of Historia as she runs through her options. Purely practically speaking, of course, there's the question of animation budgets and how this is just a cheap scene. Especially considering we have horses running all around the place, so you probably want to hide them because, that is like literally one of the hardest things to do in animation. That said though, from the story perspective, and more importantly Ymir's perspective, all of this is about Historia, so I think the extended focus on her individually makes perfect sense. Though what really gets me is what she says next, effectively saying, I can't protect you all by myself. The dub here does what it does best, adapting the wording from the literal, I won't be able to protect you with my power alone, to a more personal,
I'm just one person. I can't protect her forever.
Though literal or not, the idea of acknowledging one's helplessness is very much there, which is exactly why I think the entire Historia Ymir story hits so hard. I know many people, myself included to an extent, believe that their entire relationship was done real dirty. But the thing is, I kinda think that's the point. I think there's a very good reason why it's cut short just as they finally reveal their true feelings for one another. It hurts exactly because it was set up to be a glimmer of hope among all the destruction, something that also holds true for the Eren Mikasa scene, which we'll get to in a moment. But whether you think Ymir's decision of trading herself in to convince Reiner not to follow their squad is dumb or smart, that doesn't really matter because she herself makes her goal very clear. She believes that she alone won't be able to protect Historia, and she believes that by sacrificing herself, she'd buy the walls, and more importantly, Historia time. And so, that is exactly what she does. It's not clear-cut, and it's not happy. Sure, Ymir does die knowing that Historia had truly accepted her for who she was. But I mean, she still dies, right? In the long run, we do know that Historia does end up relatively safe, and, well, not captured. But does she ever truly live, or merely survive? Perhaps we'll get to see a little more of that in the final part, which for you should be either in just a couple of days or perhaps already out. But point being, yes, their story is cut short, it's abrupt, and even with the letter we'd see later on, it is not a satisfying conclusion. I think it's perfectly human not to like that. Our monkey brains are literally hard-coded not to like uncertainty. Should we have delved deeper into Historia's grieving of Ymir? Maybe, maybe not. Personally at least, I like the subtle undertone that Ymir will always be a part of Historia and that is it. I mean, she quite literally sees Ymir's memories. That's as close as you can really get. As we'd be seeing throughout Season 3 and Historia's ascension to the throne, this world simply doesn't allow her to dwell on those things. She will cry and grieve, and she will always remember Ymir and the things they shared. But in the words of a certain someone, the world is a cruel place, but it is also beautiful. Okay, sad character analysis times aside though, we see Historia zipping on over to Ymir, with Connie immediately calling to her, still using the name Krista, only for Historia to quickly correct him. We talked plenty about how Ymir made a conscious effort to use her true name, and how Historia now also accepts it last time, so I won't rehash all that again. But TLDR, this is where that sad inversion of Ymir and Historia really takes roots. Historia finally reclaims her name, just like Ymir did way back. And Ymir would end up sacrificing herself, just like Historia was forced to many years ago. As for Historia herself, she is basically just begging for answers, just asking what did Ymir mean by all of her "I'm capturing you" nonsense. Ymir, however, just remains silent. Much like with Reiner, I do think that us not actually seeing her face for this particular sequence is again the Titan working as a mask. Though Historia then yells out that Ymir should take her own advice, which again, their whole conflict revolves around making each other's mistakes and eventually coming together and completing one another. Well, almost. Though with that, Historia screams out that they need to start living for themselves and no one else. Barricades kicks in and both of them pop off, with yet another incredible ODM gear scene, as well as this very cool split in Ymir's face. I think it just neatly encapsulates the whole inner conflict Ymir is facing right now. She is forced to choose between her true self in Historia and the Jaw Titan and her debt to the warriors. Also, pretty sure everyone knows this because it's just too damn iconic. But Barricades is of course also the same song we'd hear in Season 4 as the rumbling starts and we find ourselves chasing after Eren. And also, by extension, a certain blonde royal and also a certain Ymir. Isn't that serendipitous? Though what I think is most important here is the framing, because all of this is yet again disarming us. This whole thing is supposed to be a massive W. Ymir and Historia are finally reunited, their sights are now aligned, we swing off with triumphant music playing, this is it, nothing can stop us. And that is precisely when we jump to Hannes, Eren, and Mikasa. As Barricades still plays, we see Hannes zipping around in full force, delivering a few very solid strikes on Dina. Though as Mikasa frees Eren and he screams that he must be the one to take it down, the music fades as the realization kicks in. He can't transform. Right from the get-go, why can't he transform in the first place? He is almost entirely regened, he's been napping on Berthold's back for quite a while, and unlike with Annie where he was still conflicted about fighting her until the very last moments, here, I think it's fair to say that he has more than enough drive to just annihilate Dina. The simple and obvious answer is just that he might have regened, but he is simply out of stamina, and even his missing fingies are enough to stop him. It's exactly his ability to transform multiple times in rapid succession that spooked the Marleyans later in Season 4. So this could simply become another teaching moment of something he can never let happen again. However, this is overanalyzing, and this is also one of the most important moments in the entire Attack on Titan story. So wait, there is more. Another boring and very practical concern is simply showing off the coordinates. Eren transforming here would be fine, and technically he could still show off the coordinates even in his Titan form. But him controlling literally armies of Titans in his human form just conveys the danger he poses to Marley far more clearly. So in that sense, I think it's just a matter of not wanting to dilute the impact of that revealed. We know Eren's Titan, what we do not know is the coordinates, so let the coordinates shine. But in the lore, what if there is something else holding him back? Perhaps a certain Ymir and a certain Eren from the future. To take advantage of this 1 in a million chance of him coming in contact with a Titan of royal blood, perhaps pulling some strings, is a possibility. Hold that thought for now, because before we continue with Eren, much like with his realization of there actually being no easy solution, we jump to the other scouts who are just being absolutely overwhelmed by Reiner's continued onslaughts. Jean is blown away, Erwin is just screaming that Reiner is on his way, and everything is just bad. And note how Reiner is framed here. He is no longer held down by the Titans. He seems almost like a godlike figure. The Titans clambering around them, seeming like tiny dolls that he can swing with the least bit of force. His eyes have this ever so slight glow to them. The whole scene just has this haze that immediately has a "this is where it ends" sense to it. And right away, the music shifts from that triumphant Barricades to 2 volts. The usual boss music choir fading in just as Hannes is caught like a fly. The music builds and builds and builds, but then... And with that whole inversion that had been so carefully laid out is ripped right away from us, just like it was with Historia and Ymir. Everything was supposed to be different now. We were supposed to be strong, Hannes was supposed to take the Titan down, but no. This is not your typical triumph. Oh no. Everything here is meant to convey their powerlessness. I must have mentioned this many times already, but I'm an absolute sucker for properly used silence instead of huge bombastic music in a lot of these reveals. I don't know what it is about it, but that moment of silence before the music kicks in just gives me goosebumps each and every time. And that scene of impossible silence as Eren falls to his knees, the only noise being made by him hitting the ground, is just perfect. But before we continue, this of course also wraps up many important things that have been brewing ever since the first scenes of Episode 1. And no, I don't mean Season 2 Episode 1, I mean Episode 1. We see the now very familiar blue/purplish flowers drenched in blood, just like in Eren's oddly specific long dream that you would be forgiven for thinking shows us that he is in a time loop. But yes, we've seen this exact shot in episode 1 already. Also, the entire framing of the Smiling Titan as she chomps down is of course also right out of Eren's dream, and later her eating Eren's mom. And speaking of dreams, I also love how this entire sequence has a warm glow and haze to it. Like, this shot right here, it just seems dreamy and magical. The sunset in the distance, the slightly upward positioned shots giving us those flowers in the forefront, everything about the shot is beautiful, but it's also a cruel tragedy. This is their father figure, the one who saved their lives and promised to get revenge on this exact Titan. But he failed. Also, this is absolutely me just overanalyzing because Eren just lost his uniform, but the fact that Mikasa still has the wings of freedom on her back while Eren doesn't seems like another intriguing detail considering he can't even control his own body right now in his inability to transform. As for Eren, he just completely breaks down and starts laughing hysterically. We've talked about these various coping mechanisms we see in the series and how different characters grapple with loss. But for Eren, it has always been this form of self-hatred and just laughter. He just tells himself that nothing has changed. Every time he thought he was learning, but time and time again, from the Levi squad to his first clash with Reiner, he keeps failing. I know quite a few people found Eren's laugh in Season 4 weird, but that very much tracks. That's just how he deals with it, and more than anything, that just told us that there is still an Eren inside. A very damaged Eren, but still an Eren, very explicitly expressing that through his coping mechanism. As for the flowers in the sequence, if you want to hear a few other options I raised, check out the episode 10 video I did a while back, as we also saw those spring up there during Eren's first transformations. But in this case, much like this dreamy scene itself, I think they're meant to symbolize Eren's dream of freedom, which, big surprise, also just got a very explicit connection with those same flowers in Eren's literal dream, and by extension, almost divine intervention on Ymir's part. He might not consciously know it pre-Crystal Catacombs, but for Eren, and more importantly Ymir, all of these points in time are connected, which is also why I mentioned he himself potentially not allowing his past self to transform in this instance. Because these events are fixed, Eren absolutely has to make contact with the Smiling Titan, and in order to make contact, he cannot attack it beforehand. If he doesn't tell Grisha to yoink the Founder in the future, he never gets the Founder and he never ends up here. Which then means that Grisha never yoinks the Founder, which means he can never tell Grisha to yoink the Founder, which means he never ends up here, and so on. All of these things exist at the same exact time and cannot be changed. That is at the core of everything. So restraining Eren's power here, I think, can actually be explained in that way as well. And this also sets up a nice bit of irony, because Eren's ultimate goal is freedom. So what if he is the one holding himself back? But okay, let's be honest, delete that comment. Yes, I know it's dumb, it's literally just him being out of stamina. That's it, there's not much else to it. Returning to some degree of normalcy though, obviously Mikasa also just breaks down. Though for her, I think it's more than just the loss of Hannes. I think much of her distress also comes from just pure empathy. That's of course not to say that she isn't absolutely broken over Hannes as well, but just that for her, seeing Eren just fall to his knees and blame himself also tears her apart. We know of the bond they share, and we know of the things they've been through together. So I think she just can't listen to him blame himself for everything and even apologize to his mom. This is still a video about anime, so I don't want to get like super real and dark, but I suspect at least some of you will have had similar experiences of sharing in loss, but seeing a loved one just tear themselves apart over something they couldn't control. And seeing that just magnifies that pain so much more. For that brief moment, I think Mikasa's empathy just wins out over sadness. And so she just tells him,
"Stop, that isn't true."
And with that, we get what is still one of the most beautiful scenes in the series that, again, you might already know whether this is true or not, but I am almost certain we will see replicated in some form in the series finale. Does this scene just speak 1,000 words? The world literally blacks out around them, time itself slowing down and leaving only the two illuminated by that dreamy haze of the setting sun. But next to the scene of just pure love, we jump between the, put bluntly, dying scouts one by one. Armin helplessly swings a sword, almost like a helpless child just holding on to Jean. But amongst that chaos, we have Eren and Mikasa. In her own words, the world is a cruel place, but it is also beautiful. Even in this bloodbath of a battlefield, everything around them no longer matters. The only thing she now cares about is thanking Eren for everything he has done, for always sticking by her side, and notes how her hand is right in between a frankly uncanny number of those same flowers. This right here is the dream that Eren so desperately wanted. Freedom and a peaceful life with his friends and loved ones. All of that is the tragedy of Eren's story. That dream turned out to be a nightmare that he could never escape. In his never-ending march forward, he became a slave to freedom. Which is, again, why I think a scene like this will absolutely be replicated in the finale to some extent. Especially with the explicit notes about wrapping her scarf and how big of a role the absence of her scarf plays in Season 4. But as Mikasa just pours out all of her gratitude for Eren, the world is illuminated once again. In this case, I think it symbolizes both Eren's moment of enlightenment as well as a larger moment of rebirth. This is it. He knows what he has to do. How does he know it? Well, isn't that an interesting question? Almost like that one time where he suddenly got glimpses of the key and memories of Grisha injecting him just as he had to transform to protect Armin and Mikasa. Yes, I do think this whole raw instinct and knowing exactly what he has to do is memory shenanigans. When we watch it, it's just a thing that works out, and it is an anime, so sure, why not? But in story, I don't think even Eren casually just thought, you know what, I'ma punch the Titan away. But here too, the scene is just beautifully composed. First off, notice that the anchor point for the zoom outs are the flowers. We don't just pan up, we don't zoom out from Eren, we zoom and pan from the flowers in the forefront, which to me, again, is signifying Eren's dream and Ymir's power. Also, I've mentioned this many times already, but the colorful threads that may or may not be a representation of Bifrost rebuilding Eren's fingies is really, really cool. But then... that transition in music is just beautiful. The way it goes from that emotional, sorrowful piano to that cold, meticulous tone that we already know very well from Reiner's split atop the wall, and the whole scene as Eren punches Dina away just being upped in color as if he has just achieved a higher form of being is just so powerful. I think it's another perfect example of leveraging the medium to make each and every one of these scenes hit exponentially harder. Everything from using that moment of silence, to the upped contrast of the scene, to the fact that Eren punching the arm away is deliberately hiding Dina's body that allows for even greater contrast of scale, with her palm alone being as big as Eren, very much conveying that David vs. Goliath vibe. All of it just feels deliberate in the best way possible. Also, just as Eren makes contact with Dina, we zap through all of the other shifters, presumably because they too sense Eren's connection to the paths and the Founder's power. But most importantly, if you go frame by frame, note how the lighting zaps through all of them and then converges onto a single point, aka the coordinates, and then explodes into a flashing light. I think it's just a really neat hint about the truth of the Founding Titan, and how it is actually the key to everything we've been seeing and will continue to see. Also, a common question that appears here is, why doesn't Eren just start the rumbling, like literally right here? Well, the answer is simple. To fully leverage the Founder's power, you need a Titan shifter with royal blood. That's the same reason why he doesn't start the rumbling with Historia. She is not a Titan shifter, and the reason for everything Eren does is exactly because of that. He doesn't want her to become a shifter because she would die in 13 years. He doesn't want that. Similarly, why doesn't Eren see the future if Dina too has royal blood? Well, there, it's sort of the same thing, but also the inverse. With Historia, a human, he can't use the coordinates, but can tap into the paths to the fullest extent. With a pure Titan of royal blood, he can use the coordinates, but can't tap into the paths themselves, except for future Eren shenanigans, but let's not talk about those. With a Titan shifter of royal blood, aka Zeke, he can do both. Though as Eren screams and you see Big Girl starts to play, the Titans just launch themselves at the Smiling Titan. Something that should quite literally be impossible based on our understanding of Titans. But more importantly, what I find particularly curious is Dina and the other rando Titan falling right into those purple flowers and crushing them. Or, in other words, crushing Eren's dream. By activating the coordinates, the one and only concern moving forward is the rumbling. There's a good reason why it appears in the Season 2 ending after all. This is effectively that. A micro-scale example of the power that Eren actually wields. one that simply cannot be pushed down the line any further. Yes, Reiner wouldn't pursue them back thanks to Ymir, but we all know what happens in Season 3. This is why that happens. Thus far, even though the Marley squad still were uncertain of who the founder is and what role the king plays in all of this, they could still buy time and, of course as we see atop the wall, attempt to recapture some of their lost titans. But now, there is no mystery. They know Eren has the founder, they just saw and felt its power. That dream of freedom is no more. Another thing I love here is the conflicting opinions we hear from the other shifters. Ymir suddenly says, wait, maybe there is a future inside of the walls. Keep in mind that Ymir likely has a pretty decent understanding of who the true Ymir was and the history behind much of what's happening here. I mean, she was the literal goddess of the Ymir cult after all. So to her, this could actually be a moment of, wait, if Historia gets back and Eren has the founder, Paradis can be safe. It's hard to say how much she knows of the mechanics behind the rumbling. But based on what she says here and the focus on Historia, I think you could take it to be just her thinking that Historia specifically has a future inside of the walls because Eren can keep them safe. Or perhaps the slightly wrong interpretation, Paradis as a whole will be safe because they have royalty in Historia and the coordinates in Eren. The reason why I call it slightly wrong is of course because just Eren and Historia are unable to use the Founder's power, and Ymir most certainly doesn't want her to become a shifter. With Reiner on the other hand, we naturally hear the complete opposites, with him just fuming as he asks why did it have to fall to him of all people. In part, probably because this is still an anime where the protagonist needs to be acknowledged as a special little boy, but also in part because the worst attribute of Eren isn't actually his power, it's his bullish drive. Defeating a strong opponent is one thing. Defeating a strong opponent who just refuses to stay down and will fight tooth and nail with the dirtiest tricks imaginable is a whole different story. And I mean, to be fair to Reiner, he was right on the money. The mad lad cut his own leg off and infiltrated Marley, alone. So, yeah. Though importantly, as much as the series frames this as Eren's triumph, at this very moment, nothing has changed for Reiner. If anything, this is the exact moment where he is the most serious about capturing Eren. Clearly, for whatever reason, he can't transform. Reiner has already completely broken their ranks. All he has to do now is just get Eren. Except... But again, note how he himself isn't entirely sure of what he's even doing. He just sorta knows how to direct the Titans, which to me smells like future Eren memory shenanigans featuring Ymir. And also, we again see the whole lightning zaps through all of them and then converges onto a single point. And also, I know this is absolutely me overanalyzing, but note how even with Reiner running straight for Eren, the camera pans horizontally. Perhaps also indicating the parallel or similar paths that Reiner and Eren have walked. Though another debate to be had is how long are the Titans even under Eren's control? Eren himself doesn't have royal blood, yet he completely overrides the pure Titans through contact with Dina. So the question is that grasp on them temporary, or does he actually control them right up until they die? Do they all just have like a non-stop tracking beacon on Reiner? We'll obviously never know for sure, and this same debate will pop up at the start of the rumbling. Though unfortunately, there too the circumstances around which it happens are quite muddy and any concrete conclusions aren't really, well, that concrete. But TLDR, based on what we see here, at least in a certain vicinity, Eren's control over them seems sorta binary. The moment he can control them, he does, and that connection just no longer matters. It's just kind of a thing he now has, I guess. Another one of my favorite shots in this one are the scouts all fleeing, with us getting this sort of painting-like collage of the battlefield. First off, I just love how Reiner is portrayed here, with him just being absolutely swarmed by dozens of pure Titans, and of course because this is a collage where perspective isn't entirely accurate, it seems that he is right on their tail with all of those Titans. It just really conveys that intensity of this whole thing. But to me, the greatest detail in all of this are the scouts themselves. Again, yes, Eren's uniform did just get messed up when he was captured. But I love the almost religious imagery of him leading everyone while he is the only one dressed in plain and, more importantly, light clothes. It's not Erwin, it's not Mikasa, no, it's explicitly Eren in the very forefront leading the entire scout regiment out of here. And speaking of pseudo-religious imagery, it is of course also true in-universe. Because there too, we just so happen to have another plainly dressed individual who too wields a godlike power and too led entire armies, someone named Ymir. And with Eren just awakening said Ymir's power, I think that very much tracks. Also, note another inversion here, with Bertolt now hopelessly swinging a sword around exactly like Armin did just moments before. But just as things are finally looking up, Isayama and the music department specifically just jab another knife into our poor little hearts. As the scouts all begin to flee, Ymir turns to Historia, basically pats around the heads, and as the sun fades behind them, simply says,
Please forgive me.
And as we focus on Historia's just dumbfounded face, we fade right into the second half of one of my favorite tracks in the series, Attack on D. And it's not just one of my favorite, but it's also one of the most heartbreaking in the series for me. Not just because of the untimely parting of Ymir and Historia, but also because, for lack of a better expression, it just sounds so innocent. My musical background is literally zero, so unfortunately, I don't think I really have the vocabulary to describe exactly what I mean. But it has this odd sense of immaturity to it, almost like something you'd hear at like a preschool Christmas event or something along those lines. But I think it's meant to convey just that. The trio's last connection to their childhoods being severed with the death of their pseudo-uncle Hannes. I think it's exactly that weirdly ethereal melody that has this underlying sense of loss while also feeling oddly nostalgic. Actually, I think that might even be the best word for it. This song just feels like nostalgia in musical form. Not helped by the fact that the melody itself is that of Call Your Name. This is them calling on Hannes through that nostalgic lens. Though in the midst of this very depressing retreat, Armin of course also explains his thoughts on the Ymir decision, noting that, at first, it confused him, likely as it did many of us considering that the scouts seem to have gotten away. But he then notes that Reiner not pursuing them suddenly made a lot more sense. It was because Ymir traded herself in that made them reconsider. Again, was it a smart decision? How might have things turned out if she stayed on Paradis? Well, we'll never know. It's fun to speculate about, but perfect decisions is just not what the series is about. Ymir made what she believed to be the right call to save Historia. Simple as that. Though this is still overanalyzing, so before you get too sad, there is also the scene of Eren recalling Hannes, only for us to fade to the present, and Eren is staring upward, just like he did when he was a kid looking at the obviously bigger Hannes. Of course, gazing into nothingness is exactly what people do when they're lost in thought, so that is almost certainly the intended way of looking at it. Eren is just broken inside, so him being unfocused makes perfect sense. Though in the wider story of Attack on Titan, and particularly with Eren, whose exact perspective would be used very explicitly many times throughout the story, it more so makes me wonder whether these memories are again pushed onto him. Okay, yeah, no, let's be real, it's just him being sad. Though with the mission now wrapped up, we jump on over to the Midcards where the events of the previous missions are now being declassified. I know it's a tiny detail, but little tidbits like this to remind us of the larger world within the walls were always what made me fall in love with Attack on Titan. Many of the mid-cards just elaborate on relatively straightforward things. But occasionally, we get things like the story of the miner in the Season 1 finale. And now, we get these actual declassifications that remind us that much of what the soldiers are up to are played pretty close to the chest. And considering that information in particular would be very important in Season 3, well, isn't that an interesting coincidence? Just a really nice bit of flavor in my opinion. Returning to the episode though, we return to Shiganshina, where the now extended Marley squad are all trying to catch a breath. Obviously, Reiner is just confused about her going with them willingly, but she explains that it would have been bad to send them home empty-handed. Again, we will never know for sure. Maybe this is true. Maybe in an alternate universe, Reiner returns to Marley and tells them, listen, we lost the jaw, and we kinda also don't have Annie. We're kind of in a pickle. And Marley just says, you know what, let's just attack them right now. On the other hand, maybe it changes absolutely nothing. But what matters most is again that Ymir did this for Historia, plain and simple. At the same time, she also raises a very interesting question, actually thanking them. The somewhat bizarre and messed up thing to remember is that the fall of Shiganshina actually freed her. If the warriors had never attacked Shiganshina and done the horrible things they did, Ymir would still be roaming around as a pure titan. She would have never met Historia and would have never been truly accepted by anyone. So again, say it with me now, it is all a matter of perspective. I mean, of course, everyone knows that what they did is irredeemable, but I think on a strictly personal level, she still feels a certain level of obligation to them. Because again, them being there freed her from her 60 years of imprisonment. Of course, as with everything in the story, it would of course be far better if none of this ever happened. If there was no turning people into titans, no attacks on Shiganshina, etc, but that is not the world they live in. So with that in mind, while it is tragic, I think it is also quite poetic that Ymir's story sort of started in Shiganshina and now ends in Shiganshina. Wait a minute, which Ymir are we talking about again? Because the fall of Shiganshina also started Eren's story, only his story took a far darker turn in Shiganshina. Whoa. The shot of her just reaching out for the moon is also just heartbreaking. I think there's a reason why so many different series use this POV reaching out shots. Something about it just conveys helplessness so perfectly. Also, I think the human angle in this whole thing is portrayed beautifully. Remember that as of now, we don't know Reiner and Bertolt's true backstories. As of the end of Season 2, we've heard them say some things about how they didn't want this, but still, they are villains. Yet, when all of them share this moment here and just break down crying, I think you can't help but feel bad for them. All that said, I also think there's an important meta factor to note, because as much as I think Ymir's capture and death makes perfect sense with the themes that the story had established, I think there is also a far simpler explanation to all of this. She simply knew too much. Thus far, she kept everything secret because that was her character. She had left that life behind. Well, now things have changed. That life has caught up to her, and we've already seen pieces of her past in the flashbacks. If she were to stay on Paradis, I think Isayama would have had no choice but to delve deeper into what she knows. Something that I think would have severely undermined the basement reveal. I do think there is a universe where you write Ymir returning with the scouts, being like knocked into a coma or something, and then we get a dual narrative of her and Eren both sort of completing each other's stories. Like, I don't know, picture Eren entering the basement and figuring things out, and on the opposite side, Ymir is waking up from a coma and telling all of this to Historia. Which would be yet another parallel to the true Ymir within Eren and the fake Ymir, but okay, now I'm just writing fanfiction. Point is, practically, I think she just knows too much, and for a mystery story, we just can't have her around. And also, having two Emirs, especially moving forward, I think would just be a little bit confusing. I mean, we do have two Emirs in the story, but like having them in tandem is just like a bit weird. We then fade on over to Armin's narration, where he talks about everyone taking refuge in the underground and how rations were running low. This, again, brings us full circle. Another battle, another humanitarian crisis, and everyone caught in the middle just suffers, with absolutely nothing gained on either side. Yes, I will keep using this meme. Though more importantly, we see Hanji and Connie go to talk to Erwin. Firstly, note that even now, Erwin isn't even sure who Connie is, which again explains the whole, well, if he knew about traitors, why didn't he immediately ambush Reiner and the others, line of thinking we talked about with the wall sequence. He knew there were traitors, eventually he learned that they were in Eren's squad, and only then did he narrow it down to the Marley trio, but it was just too late. Erwin is a big picture guy. He doesn't know every single cadet by name, and before this started, they just didn't have the time to go through all the files. That's why Eren's squad was split off from Annie. They just needed time to go through the suspects. Though just before we continue with our big brain squad, we cut on over to our other big brain. Eren once again beats himself down, saying that countless people died for him. But Armin then jumps in saying, well, no one died on the way back. And then laying out his hypothesis saying, Eren, you control the Titans. Jean also backs up Armin, saying that it's the only explanation that makes sense. But point is, even now looking back, Eren still has absolutely no idea what or how he did it. Practically speaking, this is just the show through Armin outwardly confirming what we just saw. Yes, it wasn't some abstract thing that the Titans suddenly turn on each other. Eren did in fact control them. Though in-universe, this naturally sparks many questions as to why he did it, how he did it, what is this supposed coordinates, is the basement the answer all over again, and a dozen other questions that we would unfortunately have to sit on until Season 3. But again, note the deep hum that kicks in once Eren starts making all of his promises.
やるしかねえ。巨人を操ってやる。それが俺のなすべき償いだ。
And speaking of things we'd be brewing on for a long time, we cut on over to the wide-eyed Connie and the others all talking about how the citizens of Ragako are suspected of being turned into titans. As I've mentioned before, this was not a rare theory at all, even while the series was going on, and even in previous episodes with the photo, I mean, it was all but confirmed. But here, I think we have a sort of a zombie situation. When you're fighting zombies, it's kind of like, yes, I am fighting zombies, we are all good. But what if you run into a zombie that just so happens to have a face of someone you know? It's still a zombie, you know it's a zombie, you know there's nothing you can do, but seeing it just hits different. Like I said, many of us suspected that this is the case. But the characters now acknowledging this is when you really realize that, hold on, what do you mean they were people? I think Levi actually vocalizes this very, very well, saying, wait, so you're telling me I've spent years killing hundreds of people? It's that layer of detachments now being taken away that allowed them to cleave them apart without too much thoughts. Again, I don't want to get like super dark and super real, but there's a reason why dehumanizing the enemy is such a big deal. If you can convince your people that the opposite side are not even human, it's much easier to fight something that you view as subhuman. In this case, we now know that the Titans are indeed human. It's bad. But that's not even the best part here, because as they let the frankly horrified Connie go, we see Erwin just smile. Levi being Levi, he just asks, what the hell are you smiling about? And while the truth behind why would only be answered in Season 3, it's not like we hadn't seen this before. We would still learn that much of this is exactly what his father had talked to him about, so this is him confirming his father's beliefs. But even knowing what we know in Season 2, this marks a crucial turning point in this conflict. Firstly, we figured out that the forces of nature that are the female titan, the colossal titan, and the armor titan are people, just like us. We don't understand godlike forces. We do understand people. And now we learn even that regular titans are people as well. There's a really good saying about how a sufficiently advanced piece of technology will look like magic. Like, think of Wi-Fi. It's literally invisible waves somehow moving information into your phone, which somehow captures those invisible waves, and somehow uses ones and zeros to somehow show you that cat picture you were looking up. It's magic. And that is precisely how we viewed Titans thus far. Now though, there is no magic, no otherworldly power that we cannot control. No, we are fighting people. A few of them might be super soldiers, sure, but all of them are still people. And what does that mean? Well, there can only be so many Titans, right? For the first time ever, there is an end to this. And on that note, Erwin says, the wall barring us from the truth will fall. And we fly far, far over the walls and continue flying through the Titan territory, only to land right in front of Shiganshina, where we meet back up with Zeke. And just like that, you remember that Season 2 happened in the space of like 3 days, and this entire thing was actually started by the Beast Titan. So yeah. Another classic case of Attack on Titan solving like 5 mysteries, only for you to realize that those solutions created 50 more mysteries that actually loops back to the earliest mysteries of Season 1. See you back next year. Though because this is Attack on Titan, even in a 5-second scene, Zeke still manages to drop a line to solve mysteries.
Not just yet.
Frankly, I don't think this is super important, so let me just quickly run through some of the potential interpretations. Firstly, and most likely, is just a teaser of the Beast Titan. A sort of a fourth wall break, if you will. He quite literally tells us the viewers that, no, not yet, you will see more of me in Season 3. Secondly, I think it might also be a sort of a response to what Erwin just said. He promised that the wall holding them from the truth would fall, but atop that wall stands the next big boss, basically saying, yeah, no. Thirdly, perhaps it's referring to the failures of the Marley squad. As in, so, you're still not done, eh? And finally, and this is definitely a huge stretch, perhaps he too felt the coordinate being activated, and this is rather him saying, oh, so you don't quite get it yet, do you? No pure titans marching toward me, no rumbling, so you're still figuring this out. Saying that, while the other interpretations are fun, I do think it's just a teaser and not much else. But with that, that is the massive episode 37, and that is also Season 2 all wrapped up. I cannot believe I'm saying this considering I've spent literal hours talking about it, but I already feel like I'll want to return to this part of the story at a later date. But before I let that idea fester too much, it's time we dive right into Season 3 and the Royal Government arc. So, I hope to see you back as we continue overanalyzing Attack on Titan. This will be a bit of a tone shift, but I just wanted to give you a heads up about the series. I've just lost someone very, very important to me, so things might be a little bit spotty for a while. I work in advance, so hopefully you won't even notice anything being wrong, but just in case, things might take a little longer. Thank you so much for the support, and thank you to our newest patrons as well. I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one.